We're talking about the trial of Hosni Mubarak, the former president of Egypt, who appeared in court today on a hospital bed where he denied all of the charges against him. Well, let's have a quick listen now to what some people on the street in Cairo were saying about that today.
I hope Mubarak gets the life sentence, not execution, because I want to see him in pain in prison.
We want him in prison for life. We've had to live in pain for so many years.
If people are crying over what Mubarak looks like now, they should watch the videos of police torture. I don't need to say anything, just watch the videos.
I'm happy about this. If you had been there on the 28th of January, you would say he deserves more than this and deserves to be sentenced to death 1,000 times.
Yes, of course, there exists optimism for the future. Today we saw criminals in the dock and it made us feel that everyone is equal. This, thank God, is a positive step. Egypt will be much better in the future after what we have seen today.
And just a reminder of our guests on the debate tonight. Adaf Swef is an Egyptian novelist. She joins us from Cairo. Here with me in the studio is Geneviève Garrigos. She's the president of Amnesty International France. Shireen Foti is an American and Egyptian lawyer. And in California tonight, Robert Springborg is a professor of national security affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School. Thanks to you all for being with us. We just heard the view, Shireen, from the street in Cairo about this trial today. Obviously, everybody glued to their television sets watching their former strongman in a hospital bed in a cage in court. Quite extraordinary. But do you think there's a difference in how his crimes are being viewed in Egypt as to how they're being viewed abroad?
I think the people of Egypt have recognized and lived with the effects of his crimes for so many years. This revolution, or I guess we can call it an uprising because it hasn't yet attained the status of revolution, but this has been an outpouring of anger at the lived experiences of millions of Egyptians with the state security forces, the abuses, the tortures, the utter poverty, the siphoning, the stealing of Egyptian resources and sending it abroad. This is just a reaction. And to see Mubarak guilty, or at least being questioned as to his guilt in a public courtroom is definitely a positive development. And I think the American line, or perhaps the foreign line in general, has been, yes, he should be tried at this point because we've decided to change our line as to how we're going to view Mubarak. However, we have to see what has the American role been in its context. And if we look at government documents, if we look at institutions such as the National Endowment for Democracy, the Rand Corporation, if we analyze their documents, their own documents and their own statements, we know that there is a policy that's in place now in the Arab world that is strictly for the infiltration of Arab governments and the kind of expropriation of the revolutions or of the uprisings for the good.
By that rationale, then, we can't blame Mubarak because he's simply been playing the game that he was forced to play by the West. So why should he be in court now facing charges?
He is complicit in those charges. He was a player and he acted in compliance with those dictates. However, the power structure has not ceased to exist and it continues to be used now. And we see with candidates like Mohammed al-Baradei, who is now running for president.
The former head of the UN nuclear agency.
He has been promoting this similar agenda. He had already been recognized by this group called Kifaya, this uprising in Egypt, which began in 2005, which we know was strictly promoted by the American government, which was funded by this new Endowment for Democracy. So there's intense involvement in Egyptian society. And there's a quote here which states, a lot of what we are doing in the National Endowment of Democracy was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA. That's Alan Weinstein, stating in 1991 at the foundation of National Endowment of Democracy.
but
So there's been kind of a
25 years ago is different to where we are now today, though, isn't it?
Right, no, but he's saying that the CIA operations have now attained a sort of legitimized factor, and that, you know, the way that the United States government is acting now for their interests is no longer in the form of CIA operations, but in supporting these types of resistance to dictatorships that are in power. And we've seen that in Eastern Europe. We've seen that with Georgia, and you see so many parallels between the two resistance movements and what they're doing. And they're
So are you saying this revolution didn't come from the streets in Egypt? That
No,
it's
I'm
being
saying
manipulated
it did
by
come
foreign powers?
It did come from the streets in Egypt,
But it's
and
been
they're-
hijacked?
Exactly. There's so much
right.
that Egyptian people have to be angry about. And it's unfair
Right.
that someone, a foreign power, should take what they are struggling for and what they've suffered through and then use it
All right,
for
let's
their
put-
own interests.
Let's put that to Cairo. Adaf, I want to see what you think about that. There is a lot of anger and there is a lot of emotion about this trial. Is that not a risky thing, though? Because that level of emotion will stop this being a fair trial.
No, I don't honestly know why every Western media outlet I have spoken with or that has tried to speak with me over the last, 3-4 days in the run-up to the trial has insisted that the anger in the country means that this will not be a fair trial. You can be angry and you can control your anger and you can see that it is better for everybody and that what you actually wish is fairness. We've had the parents of the martyrs, the 1,000 young men and women who were killed from the 25th of January onwards in the course of the revolution, killed by the regime. And their placards and their slogans and their chants are always for justice, not for revenge. The word that they use is always qasas, al-qasas al-adil, which is justice. They
But
want just
not
retribution.
everyone in Egypt wants to see Mubarak on trial. He does have his supporters.
Well,
Is this proving
yeah,
to be
but
a divisive trial?
Well, it hasn't proved to be divisive yet. There have been a few people outside the courthouse, and oddly, the people whom we are told are Mubarak supporters always seem to express their views by throwing stones and throwing bottles at other people rather than by raising banners and chanting slogans, which the anti-Mubaraks do. And so it's really questionable how many genuine pro-Mubarak supporters there are and how many people there are who are still in the pay of the remnants of the regime and the security establishment in Egypt. This is something that we can't know now. But the general feeling is that it is very important that this trial is just and that it's transparent and that justice is seen to be done. And this is the mood of the country. The mood of the country is not insane anger. It's not jubilation. It is relief that we have come to this point.
Yes, and to add, if you take the case of Ben Ali in Tunisia, we know that the trial is unfair in Tunisia, but the people from the street has been asking for a fair trial because they know that in order to rebuild their country, they need a fair trial for the people who are governing. And I agree, it's not because people are angry that they are not going. The trial is not going to be fair, but today.
But there is a lot of pressure on the interim military government, isn't there, to make this trial happen and for Mubarak to be punished. And when there is that deal of public pressure on a trial, does that not affect the outcome?
No, in fact, you know, even if the people are pushing for the trial, they want to know the truth. And they can't see with what's happening in Tunisia that if it's unfair and non-transparent, they will never know what's happened exactly. And they need to know, because they need to know, you know, you have to take into consideration that 840 people has been killed during the event of the early this year. 1,000 have been injured. It means that even if now it's limited to what's happened this year, okay, it's just a first step, but they need to know. And this is very important because otherwise they will never trust any government that will come. That is the fact.
Robert Springborg, I'd like to bring you in on that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a fair trial is going to be, in my mind, very difficult to achieve. First, there's the actual bill of indictment, and the question is, how was that formulated? Who made the decisions about what to include and what to exclude? The independence of the Egyptian judiciary is a major question, and the continuing sort of sword of Damocles hanging over the right of a civilian court to try Mubarak, because it has been put forward, of course, that Mubarak is still, as a serving military officer, and therefore entitled to a military trial as opposed to a civilian one. So I think it's going to be extremely difficult for this to be, if you will call it, an antiseptic trial in which everyone agrees that all due process was followed, the right charges were issued and responded to in the appropriate way. This is going to be extremely difficult to do. And so there will be questions surrounding this trial, I think, for years to come, whatever the verdict is in the end.
Oh, Genevieve.
Yes, but it's not more difficult than when we had the trial of Videla years ago in Argentina, or for the in Cambodia last
Cambodia,
year.
right.
Yeah, it means that, of course.
But in Cambodia, it's a long time after the event, isn't it?
And so what? People has been disappearing.
In Chile, it was a long time after the event.
If you look at what's happened in Argentina, witnesses has been disappearing, not to come to trials. It means that the issue are still very sensitive. The pressure is there, and you have all the people who has taken advantage of the situation on those years that they are still there. It means that it's always difficult, but I don't think it's more difficult there than in other countries. What it will be difficult today is that the fact the army still has the power, that the state of emergency is still in place, and they still can arrest people and torture people, etc. This is also really a problem, and I think we have to emphasize that the trial
and
is
will
not
that
everything.
be made better by the trial of Mubarak?
Yeah, but okay, but it's a step, but we have a lot of other steps. And when you look at the situation, including about economical, social, cultural rights, how poverty is criminalized today in Cairo and in Egypt by the army and some party. There is a lot of work to do, and I think we can trust the people. They want a fair trial, okay? And
okay, Sorry,
and I think it's also important that the army needs to be held accountable, because the army also did participate in the deaths that occurred during the revolution, and in the aftermath, since the Supreme Council for the Armed Forces has been in charge, they've attacked on numerous occasions Tahrir Square. They've attacked demonstrators. We just saw 2 days ago faces, bloody faces, the families of martyrs that were sitting for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I believe, in Tahrir Square, were attacked by the army after being given authorization to be there. So there's a clear problem and a clear discord between the army's actions behind the scenes and what they've been representing. And so we really need to have a civilian body in place in governance, and not a military body. And also we need to recognize that the military regime that is now in place is that of the former Mubarak regime. It is nothing different from what was already in place before. And so when we say Isqat al-Nizam, which is fall of the regime, that was the primary slogan during the revolution, during the uprisings, that means the fall of the entire regime, not just Mubarak and his sons. That's not adequate.
Right, absolutely. But what about what we're talking about is a huge change taking place. Egypt has been under a dictatorship for 5 decades. It's been under a dictatorship the whole time. Now it's moving towards democracy. Elections are slated for November. What about the South African model, for example, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was set up over time and which went through case by case, as you're saying, members of the military, members of the security forces, members of the police? What about something like that?
I think that's a very important model that should be followed as well. I was in Egypt in February and talking to members of the judiciary and members of the legal profession there. A primary model was the Constitution of Brazil, the Constitution of South Africa, and their role, their regional geopolitical role in the region. I think it's very important to look at examples of other countries, but always remembering that Egyptian sovereignty is extremely important here, because that's what has been at issue for the past 40 years. And we also know that there existed a social type welfare state during the era of Nasser, which was dismantled, step and step at a time by Sadat and then Mubarak. And we've seen, when we talk about state assets that were sold for just a fraction of their real price, and the
oil and gas sales. Well, that's part
Right.
of the case against Mubarak at the moment. But I want to just stay on this
Sure.
idea of a South African model for the moment. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that, Ahdaf in Cairo? Ahdaf Swaif, are you still with us? I think we've lost Ahdaf Swaif, unfortunately. What are your thoughts on that, Genevieve, about because we've got lots of, we've got no precedent here, but we've got lots of examples we can compare it to. Saddam Hussein in Iraq, for example, was another one which seems to be, obviously he was captured by the Americans, but he was tried by the Iraqis and he was sentenced to death. It doesn't seem to have done any good there, for example.
No, because it was okay. The way it has occurred, it was. It didn't allow the people to know, all this process truth, justice, and reparation, compensation, and the process is very important in order to rebuild behind, okay, and it didn't happen in Iraq, and we see the situation anyway today. I don't know if I know I am not a specialist of what's happening in South Africa, but anyway, I think also the situation was completely different. Okay, and what's happening in Egypt, and what it continued to happen in Egypt. Okay, don't forget that since the army took the power after Mubarak left, 10,000 people were presented on military court for
Civilians who
civilian,
for protesting.
Some
right.
of them protested, other some robbery or things like that. But very. For freedom of expression, freedom of demonstration, etc., and with very unfair trial. In few minutes you are condemned, and then you can see that the context, it's really different on the context in South Africa. And here, when the people say we want to know what's happened, they want to know it now.
We're running out of time, Robert. I just wanted to bring you back on that point. If we could just hear your views on that.
Well, I think it's very important to discriminate between a political and a judicial process. Much of what's been discussed here is really going to have to be taken care of at a political level as the military is brought under civilian control, God willing, as Parliament begins to assert itself and so on. Then various of these political issues will be dealt with through normal democratic processes. So one is going to have to restrict pretty tightly, it seems to me, the judicial processes to quite specific crimes, or it'll make a mockery of the judicial system, and it will boomerang in its effect. So I think both things, the judicial and the political changes are the judicial trials and political changes are necessary. But I think the truth and reconciliation of the very grand sort that was achieved in South Africa is not possible in Egypt at the present time, and I think it would be better to focus much more on the political than on the judicial.
Okay, Robert Springborg, we'll have to leave it there. Shireen Foti, Genevieve Garrigos, and Ahdaf Swaif in Cairo, if you can still hear us. Many thanks to you all for joining us, and thanks to you, of course, for watching. That's it for tonight's debate. I'm sure we could discuss this for many hours. We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid.